everyone. Welcome to the Poetry Foundation's online event to turn the world around for Audre Lorde and Pat Parker. Tonight will be a grief portal and channeling space featuring readings, performances, and conversation with Indira Allegra, Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and Mecca Jamilah Sullivan. My name is Noah Fields, and I am the Events and Accessibility Coordinator at the Poetry Foundation. I use she or they pronouns, happy trans day of visibility, by the way. And as a visual description, I am a white trans femme with shoulder length curls, and I'm wearing a Blackness top and hearing aids. I'll begin with a recognition that the Poetry Foundation building sits on the homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa nations, among other Indigenous nations. Indigenous people continue to live here today, and Chicago is home to one of the largest urban Indigenous communities in the United States. We gather recognizing that some of us are settlers on colonized land, and that a land acknowledgement is the bare minimum we can do to acknowledge the colonial structures in which we are living. Here are some access notes for tonight's program. First, to find live captioning, you can click the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, or you can follow the link in the chat to preview them in a separate window. Additionally, tonight we will have two ASL interpreters with us, Lavender and Flo, and we will spotlight them alongside speakers throughout the event. This event is being recorded and we will post it on the future on our website for public viewing. If you encounter any technical issues and need support, feel free to message anyone from the Poetry Foundation team. We invite you to treat this as a relaxed virtual space. Feel free to do what you need for your body and mind to be more at ease. Come and go as you need, eat a snack, stretch, hydrate. Take a second now to make yourself 10% more comfortable. Tonight's reading is a partnership with the Poetry Coalition, part of the series on the theme, The Future Lives in Our Bodies, Poetry and Disability Justice. That line comes from the evocative poem, Femme Futures by Leah Lakshmi Pyapsna Samarasinha. Speaking to that theme, the title of tonight's reading, To Turn the World Around, is from Audre Lorde's Cancer Journal. In the months following her mastectomy, she wrote in her journal, the enormity of our task to turn the world around. It feels like turning my life around, inside out. If I can look directly at my life and my death without flinching, I know there is nothing they can ever do to me again. Disability was a powerful shared experience for Audre Lorde and Pat Parker. Perhaps we can learn from their friendship as a form of access intimacy, which Mia Mingus describes as that elusive, hard to describe feeling when someone else gets your access needs, the kind of eerie comfort that your disabled self feels with someone on a purely access level. And now I'd like to welcome our first performer of the night. Indira Allegra uses weaving as a framework to explore tensions which haunt non-human and human relationships. Allegra's work has been featured in Art Forum and BBC Radio 4, and their writing featured in American Craft Magazine, Cream City Review, and Hysteria Magazine, among others. They are a United States Artists Fellow. Please welcome Indira Allegra.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I want to say happy Trans Day of Visibility to everyone out there. And I'll start with the visual description. I have medium brown skin and curly hair with a lot of silver coming through. I'm wearing a striped jacket against a framed collage in the background. And there's a light from a window just to the right of me, which is coming in. I'd like to thank the Poetry Foundation, Noah Fields, and Alex Benjamin. Big gratitude to each of you Mecca and Alexis, I'm so honored to be with you here today and to fellowship around sister love. Many thanks also to the interpreters and the tech team who make this event possible. I'm going to alternate between excerpts of Sister Love, which I think offer valuable wisdom coming out of a seasoned disabled practice, and my own reflections on those teachings through my verse. I should say that the content of some of my poems will reference intimate partner violence, physical and mental illness, and miscarriage, among other experiences. So if something that I'm saying touches a chord that's really raw in your life, please feel free to step out, take care of yourself, and my hope is that you will return when you feel ready. I'll start with an excerpt from a letter Pat had written to Audre on March 12, 1988. Last week, I was so depressed that I started to call and cancel, but didn't. Judy managed to get me out of it, not by a bunch of false platitudes, but by understanding and listening. This is such a beautiful teaching for me around the power of understanding and listening and resisting what I feel like is a norm within the dominant culture to want to jump in and fix things. And sometimes I secretly wonder if unsolicited advice could be a cause of death or illness, but that's a whole other art project and poem together. The context for this next poem is two coworkers sitting at a bar during Halloween weekend. It's called Blue October. I spent 3 hours working on this head wound. Kathy beams blackened teeth. I think the brain looks really good. She grips the handle of the knife glued to her temple, in line with the serrated edge slurring through the side of her head, a filthy start to a Halloween weekend. Doesn't look straight. My coworker dips her bloodied face into the mouth of a cranberry vodka. When she emerges, the tip of the plastic blade catches my sweater. I'm still dressed for work at the shelter where we both handle intakes for women on the run. Rick was never any fun. She tilts her chin back to catch what is welling up in her throat. He never let me out this late. Across her neck is a slash, crossed with 7 vertical lines. Frankenstein stitches or tick marks, remembering the number of tries she needed to leave him before the prints from his hands could fade from her neck completely. She slips the bartender a smile, his biceps shaking pisco sours for a French maid and a cat woman at the end of the bar, their latex shining. He is taking a damp rag to Catwoman's chest where she has spilled some foam. Kathy frowns, cracks her face paint at the sober tonic I am cradling. What are you supposed to be? Perhaps more carefree at parties, more eager to play in plastic horror, but I can only imagine the fetus she dropped that severed thumb the last time Rick enforced her evening curfew. Grew up religious or something? She slips a finger beneath a bra strap, checking the level of her breasts in the mirror against the shelf of Absolute bottles backlit in neon, casting a pall of blue light across the empty stripe of her ring finger. It glows brighter than the threadbare bandage she's wrapped around the blade to keep it from falling. She grips my shoulder, stammering, God, who wants to fuck a head wound? January 4th. 1988. A letter from Pat to Audre. She has set up a schedule of people to keep me company and make sure I don't get depressed. These folks are getting me depressed and driving me fucking nuts. And none of them act like it's okay for me just to sit and not talk. It's like if I just sit silent, then I must be depressed. I feel like there's a deep teaching in here around quiet as being a necessary practice and component within a disabled experience. And I know it's important for me when I'm trying to understand what my body-mind is articulating. So I have two poems in response to this particular teaching. The first is called Drown. Blue muscle. In the intertidal zone, your tongue is lacquered cold with mother of pearl. Lips soaked with gray horizon. I press my face against the still line of your mouth, a blue muscle submerged in salt water, your body split against the rock where you remain bonded. This next poem is called Incidents of Harm. Evidence has shown I am walking through the valley of ideation down the center of this tablet that wasn't supposed to be habit forming, but I am deferring to Paxil. I am following directions, nodding to pink-coated Snap tablet, a prescription benefit too small to be good to pop in your mouth tablet, white center, white powder, side effects include nightmares, dizziness, crying, risk, feelings of electricity in my body generated from withdrawal, attempting to power 6 years of late night television ads for paroxetine at a rate of 20 milligrams times 30 days of taking orders from Glaxo Wellcome equals a 600 milligram spill down the center of this valley of ideation I am walking through, evidence has shown. January 4th, 1988. A letter from Pat to Audre. First, there are the folks who look at me like I have one foot in the grave. I fully expect them to ask me what kind of friggin' casket I want. And Audre, they whisper when they talk to me. Is cancer supposed to make my hearing super sensitive or what? Then I get the inquisitive ones who feel like I must now be the local breast cancer authority and feel perfectly free to ask me everything they ever wanted to know about breast cancer. And then I get the person who thinks I'm totally helpless and wants to help me piss. For me here, the teaching is about the psychic environment that a sick or disabled person must navigate, sometimes even when accessing community support, and how that impacts the overall condition of one's body-mind. This next poem is called Subcutaneous Condition. He bends down to look under my dress to see what he thinks is young pussy, that brown fat. Is he drawn to the tumor growing here, the mutation between us that leads to a rapid, orderly proliferation of injuries, what my name is, number, how much it costs to suck this soft tissue tumor. If I date brothers, white guys, Mexicanos, cutaneous conditions, if I can spread it, greater than a size of 6 centimeters so he can taste it, do a threesome if I got babies, if I want them, how I should be grateful for his attention, most commonly found in the persistence of his lobulated desire below the surface of my skin, his craving fatted, pressing my left ovary face down into the crotch of city blocks that talk in tumors, safe routes I want worsened into blood vessels that feed the heavy danger in my hip, growing in crosswalks and curves. The fight or flight responds to his slippery palms around the lump, the tumor announcing my that mass derided, split off from itself into the February 6th, 1988, a letter from Audre to Pat. Pat, I respect your decision about chemotherapy. Any decision we make about our own bodies after considering facts is the right decision. Our decisions do not kill us. They are you and me making a move for life. What kills us, oh my sister, is indecision and despair and turning ourselves over, unheeding to any of those others, well-meaning and otherwise. You are always so sure they have the right answers. I think the teaching here is clear. And the context for this poem is the evening prior to surgery. It's called Last Supper for Teratoma. Before the first incision, I take the last meal. In my kitchen, I imagine the cysts bubbling from my ovary, boiling down tooth and bone for clear broth to slide the meat in. Masses metastasized into fatty portions of skin and sebum, the accumulation of anxieties swelling like cooked peppers from the heat. I dip the spoon in and taste my tumor in the cooking. This next quote is from Audre Lorde's foreword to Pat Parker's Movement in Black. We were both Black. We were both lesbians. We were both poets in a very white, straight, male world, and we sat up all night trading poems. There's a beautiful teaching in here, I feel, around the acceptance of being a world unto oneself within another world. This next poem, or choreo poem, is White Shoelaces. We are the only Black family in a dining car of a southbound train across the Shasta Pass to California. White children stare at us with breakfast chewing in their mouths, small fingers peeling the skin of fruit grown below the border. I watch them, like clusters of nervous mice. My brother makes small piles of salt and pepper on the tablecloth. Are different kinds of white folk. My father says slowly, like foghorns I had heard on the coast that summer. There were warnings that came out big barrel chests, keeping ships off rocks that were invisible at night. I looked up, and he was quiet. Outside the window are branches bending from the storm that swept the past 12 hours before us. I wonder which white folk are like the snow-covered pines on the mountain, or like the apron our waitress wears, bleached but smeared with coffee grounds and ketchup. Maybe these whites are more brittle, like the shells of my hard-boiled eggs. Maybe I'm wrong about it. Maybe whites are soft to touch, like the space around my own dark pupils. What if it's white, like light on deep water? I want to ask. My father is frowning now that the waitress hasn't been back to the table for a while. I look down at my shoelaces. White like the neighbor that unclips his pit bull when my brother and I walk by each afternoon. I'm worried. Papa? I ask. Which kind can I play with? January 22nd, 1990, and a letter from Audre to Pat Parker's partner, Marty. This is after Pat has passed. I can't tell you, Marty, what it means to me to have the necklace from Pat, the reality of its power, and that she thought of me. For me, the teaching here is on the sacredness of gratitude and expressions of it between people with disability. And I just want to say how thankful I am to be connected to Pat Parker's legacy, in part just by living in Chochenyo Ohlone territory, otherwise known as Oakland, California. So many of the places that she lived in the Bay Area are places that I can walk past or take the bus by, and that feels really special to me. I'll leave you with this last poem. It's called Miscarriage.
I am on Earth. You are red milk leaked across galaxies. I am watching your death from a moving platform. You are in retrograde, traveling backward against the backdrop of the sky. My axis is tilted with why am I punished? The sun commanding my orbit into endless anniversaries of your passing through. You are a star, the luminous sphere of you are my mother, embraced by gravity, anchored in darkness.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Indira, thank you so much. That was beautiful, generous. I love the ways that you wove between the letters and your own artistic work and your own poems. That was beyond stunning. To those in the audience who want to find more of Indira's work, you can check out their website, which we'll place in the chat below, and also their Instagram handle. And up next is the genius Alexis Pauline Gumbs, a queer Black feminist, love evangelist, and an aspirational cousin to all life. They are the author of several books, most recently, Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons for Marine Mammals. Gumbs is the co-founder of the Mobile Homecoming Trust, an intergenerational experiential living library of Black LGBTQ brilliance. Please take it away, Alexis.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here, grateful to be in this beautiful company, grateful for everyone who made this event possible. My name is Alexis, and I am a Black woman with big wild hair and big blue earrings and a pink top and a white necklace made of shells. And this is an excerpt from my forthcoming biography, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde. It's an excerpt from the chapter that is about the love between Audre Lorde and Pat Parker. And it also quotes many of the letters, including some of which Indira has already beautifully introduced us to. The slideshow was called Filling the Void. You were in it. That's Pat Parker in a letter to Audre Lorde. Marine geologists call the wide spaces at the bottom of the ocean the abyssal plain. Plain because they are smooth areas up to 20,000 feet below the surface. Abyssal because their darkness and the pressure of being there means scientists haven't really been able to explore them. Despite or because of the fact that humans can't stand it, the abyssal plain is full of life. It's one of the most biodiverse areas on the planet. It is a refuge, especially for those creatures who live better without oxygen. And for those of us who do need oxygen, it helps us breathe by playing a major role in the ocean's work to process the CO2 in Earth's atmosphere. Sister comrades, Audre Lorde and Pat Parker, sent letters between Staten Island, New York, and Oakland, and then Pleasant Hill, California, for decades. During the almost 20 years of their friendship, they sent love, advice, curiosity, and support to each other as Black lesbian feminist poets, as socialists in support of a revolution by the global South majority, and eventually as two warriors fighting cancer. But they wrote across a mysterious, pressurized landscape. Sometimes their messages showed up garbled, as if they were speaking through water. The stress of capitalism, the urgency of want, and the possibility of death were always peeking through. They reached for each other anyway, from different edges of the void. A continent divided us. Audre Lorde in her preface to Pat Parker's A Movement in Black. North America is not an abyssal plain. Most abyssal plains occur at the edge of a continental shelf. It would be impossible for an abyssal plain to show up in the middle of a continent. North America is not an abyssal plain, but the United States, with its manifest destiny story, its genocidal march across the plains, its pretense of being impossibly smooth, the fact that it took the drowning of generations of captives to build it, its expanses of underwater mortgages, how it sits here with its 100 million gallons of capitalist pressure infusing every breath. The United States is some kind of abyss, to put it plainly. In her preface for Pat Parker's collection of poems, Movement in Black, Audre described meeting Pat in 1969, quote, on the last night of my first trip to the West Coast. When she asked her white hosts in the Bay Area where the Black women were, they answered in the singular and left her at Pat Parker's doorstep. Audre depicts an immediate kinship. We were both Black, we were lesbians, we were both poets in a very white, straight male world, and we sat up all night trading poems. Parker describes their first meeting more provocatively. Who is this bitch? She asked in the opening lines of her poem for Audre. I mean, really, who is this bitch? Parker was remembering Audre's audacity in giving unsolicited advice about her poetry and her love life on the very first day they met, thinking about what Indira just said about unsolicited advice as a cause for illness and death. Audre never stopped giving out advice, but eventually Pat Parker did start asking for guidance about navigating the literary world, focusing on her own writing, household finances, the process of becoming a mother, accepting community care, and restructuring her life after a cancer diagnosis. Sometimes she would ask for advice about small things too. She closed one letter with a postscript, P.S. How do you cook beets? From that first night, Audre felt like she had the opportunity to be an older sister. She later told Pat that it was more than sisterhood. It's like being in a relationship with a beloved part of my own self. She reveled in the intimacy their poetic first connection provided. There were poems in her mouth, on the table, in the refrigerator, under the bed, and in the way she cast about the apartment, searching for not answers, but rather unexpressible questions. But the next day, Lorde lamented, a continent divided us. For most of their friendship, with the exception of a few cherished visits they reached for each other across sometimes unanswered letters, phone calls, postcards, checks, and greetings sent through other women traveling coast to coast. Hearing of each other as often through the feminist gossip mill as through direct contact, they each sometimes wondered about the status of their friendship. But in the end, which is not the end, their love persisted, even across the abyss. Warmth from a cold place. That's Audre signing a letter to Pat Parker. Cold seeps up from the bottom of the abyssal plain through vents that express isotopes. These are among the few places where you can see the ongoing chemical reaction that allows the core of the earth to become cool enough to have a surface. Evidence of stardust, still in the process of transforming into earth. Communities of ancient mollusks thrive near these cold seeps, chemosynthesizing the sweetness of radioactivity, like plants photosynthesize the sweetness of the sun. 2 billion years ago, when cyanobacteria covered the earth, making oxygen the dominant element in Earth's oceans and atmosphere, some of the oldest inhabitants on the planet had to adapt. These places of sulfuric opening, where there is hardly any oxygen or light, are some of the only places these ancient bivalves can still breathe. So, Audre, who knew that Pat lived in the land of the poet killers, assumed that her friend must be dead, for she knew that that was the only reason Pat hadn't answered her letter. Pat Parker, preamble to a letter to Audre Lorde. For a long time, scientists thought there weren't many sea creatures on the abyssal plain or anywhere else with pressure too intense for a scuba tank. The weight of the ocean would make it unlivable, some theorized. But it turns out that water is not particularly compressible. So living with the whole ocean on top of you is not much more of a challenge than living with the 10 tons per square meter of sky on top of you right now. There is pressure for deep sea creatures, but they don't notice it in the day-to-day. The pressure within their bodies pretty much matches the pressure coming from outside. The two poets commiserated about the impact of racism, sexism, homophobia, and economic injustice on their everyday experience. They also groaned about how much time everything that was not poetry took up in their lives, and underlined the urgency of their work. Neither of us has forever, Audre reminded Pat. But they both believed that their work, to the extent that they could do it, would have a life-saving impact on the world long after they were gone. We are each other's support in a way that is particular and irreplaceable, Audre said to an audience at a Valentine's Day reading she and Pat did at the Women's Building in San Francisco in 1986. Both poets, friends for 18 years by this point, dedicated poems to Parker's daughter, Anastasia, who was running around outside the reading with her other mother. It had been 10 years since they had shared a stage. I would apologize to you for us being late, Pat Parker joked to the crowd of women at the beginning of the reading, but since it's all Audre's fault, I won't. At the end of the reading, Audre and Pat hugged for a long time at the front of the room while the gathered women screamed their stomping, standing ovation. Write me soon, or I'll haunt you. Audre Lorde at the end of a letter to Pat Parker. From the perspective of the creatures who live in the abyss, it is not an abyss, it is home. Bioluminescent or adapted to the dark, they have not fallen from any great height. For the animals who move across the bottom of the abyss, it is not only depth, it is another kind of surface. They are not experiencing a metaphor for death. For the scientifically literate land animal, the abyss is an abyss. Yes, because of the lack of light. Yes, because it is 4 miles deep. But most of all, because it is unknowable. So even though their references to the threat of death had become so routine as to be defiantly flippant and almost mundane, Pat Parker felt bad about writing to Audre after her own cancer diagnosis. What if it triggered Audre or brought up bad memories? Wouldn't the details of Pat's experience just burden Audre with the messiness of her early process with cancer before she had, from Pat's perspective, learned to navigate it with dignity and grace? But it would have felt worse not to tell her. Audre was already hearing rumors about Pat's health challenges through the lesbian grapevine. Pat was thinking about the warning Audre had sent her years earlier. Beware all the hatred you've stored up inside you and the locks on your tender places. Pat Parker thought maybe her unprocessed anger was the reason she had cancer. But when she thought about how cruel it was that the stress of living as a multiply oppressed person could be the reason she had a terminal illness, she just felt more rage. How could she acknowledge the emotional and spiritual healing her cancer might be calling for in her life without blaming herself for her own illness? She was also nervous that Audre would get angry with her for choosing to treat her cancer with chemotherapy. I feel like a nuclear reactor out of control, Pat said when she finally wrote. Audre offered her bleak reassurance that the entire society they were both immersed in was carcinogenic, and she need not blame herself at all. Any decision we make about our own bodies after considering facts is the right decision, she emphasized. She offered practical advice: stop eating processed foods, ask about vitamin C therapy during chemo, political perspective, cancer itself is big business, and personal guidance. Yes, you do need to cry. Sometimes she cited her own book, The Cancer Journals. After that, they both ramped up the use of the word love in their letters, aware that they did not have control over how many letters they would get to send or receive. Ultimately, even for these two celebrated poets, words were not enough. In her last surviving letter to Audre Lorde, Pat Parker wrote, "This is not a piece of paper, but my arm extending across all the damn miles between us to hold you and hug you with all the strength we have had to gain from the pain. This is my hand reaching inside you to fill the hole that is there. Right now, I feel betrayed by words. There is nothing I can say that says what I feel. I'll talk to you soon when you return from the place I can't see." Pat Parker to Audre Lorde. One of the reasons geologists only recently identified the abyssal plain as a feature of the deep, and that those of us on the surface of Earth still do not know much about it, is that it is not well preserved in the sedimentary record. While layers of ancient river silt, Sahara sand, and volcanic ash show up in the geologic record, the earth matter of the abyssal plain usually falls between the cracks, literally. The subduction process, or the way Earth falls into itself when tectonic plates move, mean that the abyssal plain moves out of the record and back towards the core of the planet, where the heat is. Audre Lorde was an adult before she ever saw her grandmother's homeland of Carriacou on a map. So for years, it was an imaginary place where she could think of her mother happy and young and surrounded by her favorite fruits and people. Is that another kind of abyss? The unmapped place, a great beyond, a possible heaven? Once she finally found it on a map in the library and learned the term Zami, Audre imagined Carriacou as a place where women supported each other as lovers and friends while men stayed mostly at sea. She wrote of a generative and abundant presence of women, where some might have mourned an absence of men. Pat Parker had an atlas too. So once, when Audre Lorde mentioned a vacation she and Frances would be taking soon to Gualala, she looked the place up. She never found it. Audre assumed Pat would know where Gualala, a coastal town in Southern California, was located since she lived in the same state, but California is not one state. It is a liminal threshold, and Pat Parker couldn't find Gualala in any atlas, so she began to refer to it as the place I cannot see. It was distressing to Pat Parker that Audre Lorde could be somewhere off in the world and I can't visualize where. What was this place that slipped through the cracks in the record or in Pat's research methods? It was not acceptable to her that Audre would just travel off into oblivion. As it turned out, Pat Parker was the one who went first into the truly unchartable void. On June 17th, 1989, Pat Parker died of cancer. For the rest of Audre Lorde's life, which was a little over 3 years, she sought to honor her sister comrade. She offered words in place of the dead air between us. She reached out to Pat's partner, Marty, asked after her daughters, wrote poems in her honor. A month after Pat Parker passed away, Audre Lorde wrote, "I can't believe you are gone out of my life, so you are not." In 1990, she wrote, "It's almost a year, and I still can't deal with you not being at the end of the line." And then in 1992, she joined her friend again in that place between continents where the earth still burns like a star. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. The abyssal plane is such a beautiful, beautiful phrase and concept, and your narrating of the intimacy of Pat Parker and Audre Lorde is incredible, and I can't wait for the full book. What a gift. If you'd like to read more of Alexis's work, you can check out their website, alexispauline.com, and we'll put that link in the chat. Now we'll turn over to the Q&A portion of the evening. So feel free to submit any questions you might have via the Q&A button in Zoom. And moderating the conversation, I'm going to welcome Mecca Jamilah Sullivan, who will also read a little bit first as an introduction. Mecca Jamilah Sullivan is the author of Big Girl, a novel, The Poetics of Difference, Queer Feminist Forms in the African Diaspora, and Blue Talk and Love, which was the winner of a Judith A. Markowitz Award from Lambda Literary. Dr. Sullivan is an associate professor of English at Georgetown University. A native of Harlem, she lives in Washington, D.C. Mecca, please take it away.
Thank you so much. So I will begin by just echoing the expressions of gratitude that folks have shared already. Thank you so much to everyone whose labor has brought us here to this gathering today. Thank you, Alex, Noah, Christine. Thank you, Flo. Thank you, Lavender, Indira, and Alexis. It's truly a pleasure to engage with you, and I'm excited for our conversation. I'm Mecca Jamilah Sullivan. I'm a big Black woman in a purple shirt with long braids, and in the background behind me, there are paintings and books, lots of jewel tones, purples, turquoises, and greens. So as Noah mentioned, I'm going to begin with a couple of minutes from the introduction to Sister Love, the letters of Audre Lorde and Pat Parker. And I had the tremendous opportunity to write the introduction. The essay is called, "I Think You Changed the World, Black Lesbian Feminism in Love and Letters." Reading writers' letters is the best kind of eavesdropping. It brings the rush and sweetness of hidden listening, the secret drinking in of voices that children thrive on, clinging to doorways, palms slick, ready to learn what they have yearned and yearned to know. The hiddenness somehow makes the listening better. These words are not meant for us, but for a world before and beyond us, and so each syllable is a gem. The words demand that we reach for them and that we grow in the reaching. Whether we are, as I am, the grown-up, fat, Black, queer, women writer versions of little Black girls eavesdropping on our mothers and aunties at the kitchen table, or if we're queer or women or gender expansive or feminist in some other way, this stunning volume of letters between Audre Lorde and Pat Parker carries that breathlessness of urgent listening, the thrill that sparks when learning is both demanding and deeply sweet. Lorde's and Parker's immense contributions to feminist, Black, lesbian, queer, and American literary culture and activism cannot be overstated. Their combined bodies of work include over 20 poetry collections and nonfiction monographs, dozens of published poems, essays, lectures, several short stories, plays, performance pieces, and mixed genre works. With these works and with their activism and their teachings, which we've already been sort of reflecting on, Lorde and Parker made foundational contributions to feminist discourses of the 70s and 80s and offered incisive critiques of gender, sexuality, race, class, embodiment, and power, around which Black feminism takes its shape today. The letters gathered in Sister Love, the letters of Audre Lorde and Pat Parker, 1974 to 1989, fill some of the silences. Expertly edited by Julie Enser and culled from the archives of Spelman College and the Schlesinger Library at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, the dialogue that we overhear in the pages of Sister Love traces not only the shared processes of thought and questioning through which these writers' works come to life, but also maps the creation story of what we now term a Black feminist literary practice and a politics that for so many of us shapes the work that we do today. In the letters, we overhear a story of collaborative self-authorship, self-authorization, a process of survival that comprises humor, anger, tension, and tenderness as these women write themselves and us into a Black feminist future. So one of the things that I find most striking about the letters is how, as they build literally a Black feminist literature, and that as they develop these theoretical, political, and literary foundations in which so many of us root our collective lives, our work, our global survival across generations, they're also deeply dedicated to building the exquisite intimacy and love between just them two. In a January 18th, 1975 letter to Audre Lorde, Pat Parker writes, quote, "Once upon a time, there was this woman named Audre, and she met this woman named Pat, and she faithfully wrote her a letter. And for a long time she waited, but there was no answer. And the moral of this dyke tale, children, is that Pat Parker is alive and well, but just a little more crazier. The end." Years later, Lorde, in a letter to Parker, writes, quote, "I just finished doing an article for Hotwire magazine. That's a first. Prose is a trip and a half. It's really weird to think in terms of expanding words and thoughts instead of honing everything down to gleaming." And then 2 years later after that, Parker writes to Lorde, "It's amazing to me how you are world-renowned as a poet, women falling all over themselves to get next to you, and I always feel closer to you through your prose. There's a vulnerability there that makes me want to gather you in my arms and hold you." So as we move toward discussion, I'd love to hear from both Indira and Alexis about what this kind of holding means for you in your work. What's the place of intimacy in your creative and or political practice? Of course, we know from Lorde, Parker, and many others that the personal is the political. And Lorde and Parker sort of help us see the ways in which that work is both deeply feeling and subjective and crucially transformative beyond the self. So I'm especially interested in how you see the interpersonal informing your work and perhaps our collective liberation in 2022.
Alexis, did you want to? I can give it, okay. I feel like what I want to do with this question is like, so here's the text, and then I want to spiral out from the teachings in the text. And I want to say that this practice of correspondence has to also occur between human and non-human, you know? And that has to be such a fluent practice of intimacy moving forward. Even in my own practice, I think about making work for non-human audiences or more than human audiences. And I think in order to create the kinds of parables, the kinds of myths that are necessary in the future, it has to decenter human concern. It doesn't mean that we're not part of the story. We are. But I'm much more interested in what happens when everyone's kind of on an equal plane, in the same way that those who have passed are always with us, and that the future generations are always with us, and that we're all talking to each other through time and space, that everything is like that.
That's so beautiful. I think that the way intimacy, I mean, I feel held in my work, even though I feel like a lot of my work is very solitary, and in some ways I kind of resist the vulnerability that comes with working together. But then I also move towards it. I mean, I'm in the midst of writing a children's book with my sister, and I'm always thinking of ways to collaborate with people who I can be vulnerable with. And then I'm thinking, I mean, in terms of this biography in particular, and of course, Mecca, you know this because I've sent part of it to you, this particular part of it actually to you. And there's something about feeling held, you know, by the ways that you responded, by the ways you were like, oh, it makes me wonder about this, it makes me wonder about this, that I think is a really important part of the process. And I actually wonder sometimes if, because I've been doing that with particular pieces of this biography that I feel like are a shared passion point for me and other people. I know the relationship between Audre Lorde and Pat Parker is a shared passion point for us. And then there are other parts of it that I'm like, oh, this is, you know, this part about Joseph Beam, I know Stephen Fullwood, that's a shared passion point for us. And I love that. And I think there's been some delays in terms of the normative editorial feedback that I would be getting on this biography. And I'm like, I just feel like maybe, you know, some of our ancestors are like orchestrating it, like, okay, Alexis, but be vulnerable and share with your people. And I felt so incredibly held by that. And yeah, it's a struggle and a challenge for me. And I even think that the fact that writing is my primary form of art, which can be a less collaborative form than something like filmmaker or theater, or, you know, like there are, most art forms can be more collaborative than writing can be. Finding ways to do it that are collaborative is so rewarding. Like there's always more there than I could have ever found on my own or allowed myself to understand if I continued to understand myself as alone in any way. And I agree. I think that that's also true on the scale of species, you know, like so-called humans are not and never have been alone on this planet, could not exist alone on this planet. And what does it mean though to be in true collaboration? What are the forms of vulnerability and unlearning ourselves that requires?
I really appreciate both of those responses. And, you know, it's interesting, as I was thinking of sort of how to bring our conversation to Pat's and Audre's sort of shared intimacy, you know, of course, it's very interesting to think about the ways in which intimacy really facilitates our work in this very moment, in fact, right? And all of the work that has led us up to this moment, which is to say, it's also quite an honor for me to read your work, Alexis, and to engage your work, Indira. And, you know, Alexis, as you're speaking, I think of that moment where Lorde talks about, you were talking about vulnerability, right? And the phrase that she uses, the intimacy of scrutiny, right? Sort of what it is to bear the intimacy of scrutiny. And I get the sense that Lorde herself and Parker too, right? They're both aware of that vulnerability, the tension, the fraughtness, right? And I think we see this in the letters between the two of them, the complexity of that relationship. And yet reading the letters, we also see that the notion that writing is strictly solitary is a myth, right? It's one of the many myths that sort of, might keep us from one another and from connection on this broader sort of plane of being that we're talking about. So I want to, remind folks this is a great time to bring questions into the Q&A if you have any. I'll bring one more question. Indira, you mentioned again, sort of intimacy beyond the realm of the human. And Alexis, of course, you do a lot of work in this area, right? It makes me think about the place of the body, right? In many ways, the Poetry Foundation has gathered us under the sign of the body and the body mind. And so I'd love to kind of reflect for a second on the place of the body in your creative praxis, in your, sort of political or activist vision, your vision of justice. What does the body do for us? And what do we need to do for the body as we kind of move forward toward our vision of the future?
Well, I can start this time. These profound questions were like, oh. I love that question. I think that, and it connects, of course, so much to the last question. I think about embodiment as this, in particular, multicellularity as a collaboration, and as my experience as a multicellular organism is an experience of collaboration, not always acknowledged as such, right? I mean, I have a narrative around individuality. And yet, thinking about Audre Lorde and Pat Parker and how they were navigating being embodied and yet being poets in a way that continued to reveal this expansive desire to live beyond one lifetime, to be beyond one set of experiences. I think about, and the reason why I bring in, like the abyssal plane, and, throughout the biography, there's different ways that really the universe is the scale of a biography of a poet. And I think that that's appropriate. I think that that's a truth. That there's not embodiment separate from this larger body. And that larger body includes the planet Earth and the atmosphere and the universe composed of elements that constitute our Earth body. So that's the way that I've been thinking about it. And I think that it means, like Amora is saying in the chat, this idea of separation, I feel like I and everybody I know has been socialized into this idea of separation, and it's so harmful. But this idea that Mia puts forward of access, intimacy, and the tenets of disability justice, of which, of course, Audre Lorde has had an influence on that, even though she didn't have access to that terminology or movement for herself as a disabled person during her lifetime. It is part of unlearning that. It's part of unlearning the lie that survival can exist on an individual scale. It can't. And I think that disability justice as a practice is really at the forefront of our collective unlearning of that lie. For me, it has been had the biggest impact on my unlearning of that lie.
Thank you, Alexis. Yeah, I mean, that's the power of they for me, right? So then I share a pronoun with everything that's at the site that I'm making a site-specific work with. That's the way that when I'm recovering from surgery, and I've had several surgeries during these past couple of years, that I also share a pronoun with the bandages and the medicines and the pillows, which are supporting me in a healing process. So I think for me, the experience of body is always shifting. Yeah, based on the scale that I am interested in any given moment, you know. If I'm thinking about myself as part of an ecosystem, that's one thing. I spend a lot of time with the redwoods and the sequoias because I'm curious about their ability to remember. As some of the oldest living beings on the planet, we can barely keep it together for like 70 years. So what is the kind of anatomy and physiology necessary to remember for thousands? You know, let me meditate with my back against that. Yeah, so it really, it's always shifting. I think for me, that's one of the gifts of being able to work in performance too. Is this flexibility or mutability of my body, mind.
Thank you for that. Indira, you posed a few questions, and I wonder if you would mind just sort of bringing those questions to our conversation verbally, and we can sort of dig in together.
Good. Okay. Okay. I know this, I want to be mindful of time. Okay, so do you want, I'll ask this one. So we're talking about body minds, and Audre and Pat were able to do so much during the time that they were embodied. And so Alexis, actually, this question is for you. And Mecca, this actually may be for you too, since y'all have this, have been working and reading together for a while. But is there something that you have consciously decided to pick up that Audre and Pat maybe didn't get to finish or didn't get to go deep with, that you have felt like, you know what, this is for me to pick up and to work with as creative material?
Oh, wow, what an amazing question. I think that, I mean, what I was just saying about the universe as a scale, I think that it's not the case that Audre Lorde didn't think that way, because she really did. Like, she really thought about geology, and she collected stones, and she, from when she was a college student, you know, was organizing for a sane nuclear policy. She was part of the committee for a sane nuclear policy from back then. And she would often say, you know, we have to learn to use the creative power of difference, but we have to have somewhere to do that. So if we don't shift our relationship with planet Earth, that won't be possible. I don't think that that's the part of her work that's taken up the most, even though for me, I feel like it was very urgent for her, and it's incredibly urgent for me. I mean, she was talking about oil drilling at the bottom of the ocean and the impact of that on natural disasters, including Hurricane Hugo, which she survived. And so I wouldn't say this is something that Audre didn't pick up, but I would say that it's something that I'm continuing, that I feel was a very important aspect of her work, and is part of why the planet has such a huge role in the way that I want to be with the story of her life, because she, and you can see this in her poetry for sure, she really identified as part of this planet and theorized how energy lives and moves beyond the scale of one being. That really is part of her, a part of her legacy that I feel is so urgent for the moment that we're in, but of course was already urgent in the moments that she was in, that I'm putting right at the front of how I think about my creativity, how I practice Black feminism. And yeah, I think maybe that answers your question. I'm not sure. I will say, I don't know if this is fair, but in terms of Pat Parker, because my partner's not here and didn't say I could necessarily say this, but like, they have made art that they already shared. So I'm just mentioning that. in terms of Pat Parker, I just feel like, Pat Parker and Audre Lorde obviously both have really sexy poetry that they wrote. And like, the erotic was a huge part of the way that they moved in community. And my partner when we were making meditations in honor of our Black feminist ancestors, of course, Audre Lorde is one, of course, Pat Parker is one. Oh my gosh, the sexiest song I've ever heard. I know I'm biased, but I think I'm also right in this case, is this song that my partner made in honor of Pat Parker. And it just makes me think about the possibility of like a butch Black lesbian quiet storm radio, like that's something that Pat Parker would have loved to have exist. And I see a glimpse of it in that one song. So I'll say that too. I think that's something that Shango Dari has picked up, which I'm really grateful for.
I love that. When do we get this quiet storm? That's what the people need.
Right? The people do need this.
The people need it. The people need it. I love it. Well, we are a bit over time. So, I do want to just thank both of you. I really feel like we could just keep talking, and I hope that the opportunity presents itself at some point. But many thanks again to you, to the Poetry Foundation, to our fabulous interpreters, everyone who has joined us for this time together. Any final words that we want to offer?
Just thank you.
Yeah, just gratitude.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for that really brilliant conversation. Wow. Wisdom. I'm gonna keep it deep in my body forever. I'm just gonna really quickly share Mecca's link because we didn't share that earlier, but you can find links to Mecca's books on her website, which we'll post in the chat. And I want to say one big final thank you to all of tonight's beautiful readers and performances. An appreciation shout out to our ASL interpreters, Blow and Lavender, and to Vitek Captioning. And a big thank you to all of you for tuning in and taking part in this conversation.